Thank
So,
you.
yeah, so welcome everyone. It's great to see so many faces on our final design thinking meetup of 2020. And so we're really excited tonight to have Ken Sandy along speaking to us. And the topic is 10 steps to lead through influence. I'll introduce Ken properly in a second, but first I'm going to hand over to Zoe to do an acknowledgement of country.
Thank you. It is glorious to see you guys. So yeah, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land. So we're all coming from very different spaces, but for me, where I am is at the Darra people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to the elders past, present, and future. If anyone else wants to do a shout out to from where they're coming from, please feel free to give a quick shout out or put it in the chat. But as you can see with our map up there, there's a lot of amazing people who were here before, and there's a whole bunch of, it's really beautiful to acknowledge that and be part of it. So thank you, and thank you guys for joining us. Okay.
So, yep, so these are our organisers tonight. We're all on the call tonight, and the event is sponsored by ThoughtWorks. Normally that would entail pizza and beer in the ThoughtWorks office. Fingers crossed for next year. I'm thinking hopefully 6 months from now we'll be meeting in person. But what this has enabled is we have found that we've been getting people joining from across Australia, and I believe tonight even Singapore and some other countries. So often meetups are fabulous when we can do them online. For that reason, we can actually have a bit more impact in terms of our reach. So we might move to the next slide. Thanks, Lucas. So yeah, so we're really excited to have Ken Sandy along tonight. So I first heard Ken speak early this year, and he was talking a little bit about his book that he's released. So Ken is not just a product management exec who coaches, mentors, and leads product teams, but he's also written this fabulous book, and which I can highly recommend. I have a copy of that. And we shared on the meetup page some links to where you can find that book tonight. And Ken can usually be found in the San Francisco Bay Area, but he's just come out of a 3-month lockdown in Melbourne. So hopefully things are on the up for you now, Ken. And so Ken's going to be speaking to us for about the next hour. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat, but we're going to have plenty of time at the end of this to have a conversation and a discussion. Ken's topic tonight is around leading through influence. And I think the topic is relevant at all levels and in all roles, not just in product management, but really in our professional lives. I think there's a lot that we can learn tonight. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Ken. And Ken, I think you'll probably want to share your screen. So
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thrilled to be here, and thank you so much for having me. It's such a great group. We're up to 40 participants, or almost 40. That's wonderful. I'm really excited. Obviously, I do live in San Francisco, but I'm Australian born and bred. I've been there for, well, I won't tell you how long I've been in San Francisco, but I started my career in Melbourne and relocated some time ago, and it's just really great to be seeing such a vibrant community that has grown up in Australia and really living kind of the dream as far as amazing, innovative technology companies really building amazing products. And so I'm just super excited to be here. What I'm going to do is just quickly share my screen, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about what we're going to talk about today. All right, you should see a full page and not my speaker notes, yes?
Looks good, Ken.
Good, PowerPoint worked for me, yay. So that is correct. I've recently launched a book called The Influential Product Manager. It's very much a hands-on, very practical guide about what it takes to be influential in your organization. I've found that influence is something that people talk about a lot, but they don't necessarily pinpoint precisely what it is or what the behaviors are that make you successful as an influencer in your organization. And so I set about to research and really break that down. And the product was the book, which I've laid out sort of in across the whole product lifecycle. What are the actual activities that really help people be successful, help product managers in particular be successful? But I found that this has been very well received by design leaders, engineering leaders, and execs at product-led companies in terms of just really thinking through what it takes to build amazing products and collaborate really effectively together. In addition to the exec roles that I've held, I do now largely do consulting, workshops, and coaching, usually at exec level, and I also teach at UC Berkeley, University of Cal in Berkeley. So I've started a class there on product management now 8 years ago. 9 years maybe, and it's been, I can't even describe how we started with just a pilot class with a couple of interested students and how it's really taken off. Timing was great. All the APM programs started up around that time. And so product management, certainly from my point of view, is become a profession that's highly sought after. And now as we've begun to find it maturing, there's a lot of very transferable skills. It is possible to actually teach it and help people accelerate those skills. And so I'm very pleased to be teaching that now in my 13th semester. So we have roughly 400 product managers who've well, more than that in terms of students, but roughly 400 product managers who went through the course who are now practicing product managers in industry. Today I'll be talking about 10 steps to lead through influence. So this is sort of the Cliff Notes, if you're familiar with Cliff Notes, but the sort of summary version of what are the top 10 things that I've found that if you as a product lead do pay attention to and really focus on owning these tips or owning these steps, you will be far more successful than maybe someone who's not paying attention to this. And so some of these will be good reminders for some of you, and some of them might be new insights. We'll be talking about kind of what is influence. We'll talk about those top 10 steps, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. But do not hesitate. It's a small enough group. Do not hesitate to drop a question in chat, and I'm going to ask Kate, please feel free to interrupt me if I'm not seeing the question and it's relevant to what we're talking through. If we don't get through it, we'll definitely make sure that we talk about it at the end. Before we do get started, I would like to hear from you about what do you do to influence your organization? Just drop in the chat window a couple of ideas that you do, and I'll just sort of see what people are coming up with. Tell stories, narratives, so super important. Being able to really articulate reasons, underlying reasons, and the context that people are actually working towards. It goes well beyond obviously the facts. It's also really tapping into the emotions, focusing on benefits and the kind of the why is absolutely critical. Challenge nicely. I like that one. I'm actually going to introduce, there's a mindset framework which I like to use, and being a challenger is one of those mindsets, and really owning that and saying, look, my job is to make ideas more robust, and I want our company to do the right thing. So challenging nicely and being able to kind of really push is super important. Try to sit next to someone rather than opposite them. Understanding what's in it for them, understanding their needs. Super important with stakeholders and customers. Evidence packaged well, absolutely. And that's actually a nice add to talk about packaging it well as well. This idea of like throwing lots of data points or anecdotes is not enough. To be able to really package that up and understand what data really matters, and then giving it to people in a digestible way that also motivates and inspires them. Excellent. Well, that's some pretty good starting point. You're already experts, so I'm going to be able to run through this pretty quickly. Let me first give you a story. Some time ago, in one of my very first product management roles, I was tasked by my manager, who is a C-level chief operating officer, I believe, executive, to lead an important and very urgent initiative for the business. He asked me to get a team assembled to work on it right away. I was ambitious and hungry for leadership opportunities, so I readily agreed to this. I called a meeting together, cross-functional, including people from marketing, engineering, the design teams. I kind of gave a rousing speech about what we were trying to do, and I asked them to drop whatever they were doing and commit themselves to this new goal, as it was great importance to the C-suite, the executive. Distressed by the urgency of this new priority, the team reluctantly agreed to switch gears and focus on what I had asked them. A few days later, the CEO came and approached me and asked to speak to me in private. He was visibly angry. He proceeded to explain that several team members had come to him to complain that I had steamrolled them into working on this new initiative. I protested, but you asked me to. Isn't this something you want? He said, yes, I want this, but no, I didn't ask you to operate that way. Instead of pushing them into doing something, I wanted you to motivate them. You should have explained why this was important, provide business context, discuss the customer need. Just because I want it and ask you to lead it doesn't mean you can suddenly direct others. You use my position and my seniority to transfer authority to yourself, and that weakens me. I want to inspire my team, not simply order them to work on something. I was pretty shocked by what was said, and I'll never forget that lesson. And that sent me on a journey to really try to understand what is the difference between kind of working through influence versus, in this case, working through authority. So here's some definitions. Influence is really about aligning beliefs, behaviors, actions, and outcomes behind a common shared purpose. Now, you'll notice it'll be very easy for me to say influence is about aligning behind goals and outcomes. But you'll notice that I'm also touching on hearts, minds, and actions as well. So what people do, how they think, and what they believe, if their heart's in it. That's influence, and they're the harder things to actually achieve within influence. Authority, on the other hand, is directly controlling actions through organizational seniority, power of relationships, apparent or real expertise, or sometimes threat of consequences. Clearly, in a traditional organization, the hierarchy has authority kind of embedded in it. And in many, many roles, working through authority is primarily the way things get done. But that doesn't work, particularly in product management. And I actually have noticed that increasingly it doesn't work in almost any role, that influence has become probably the dominant way of actually aligning and working an organization towards a goal. There is a third thing, and this is something that I think is deadly for any product manager or any professional to really working, but particularly it'll unravel very quickly, and that is manipulation. Convincing someone to do something that is primarily in your interest. Steer clear of that one. So when you're driving through or leading through influence, I've chosen that word very carefully too. I've heard managing through influence. I've heard all accountability and no authority, or all responsibility and no authority. All of those are variants of the same thing, but I like leading through influence because that's essentially what you're doing. You're trying to play a leadership role in your organization to provide context, to drive organizational alignment, to create clarity around what your mutual goals are and the directions and the steps to get there. And you're looking to collaborate with your team and your stakeholders to make that happen. And that's basically what leading through influence is. So I'm going to introduce 10 points from the book, which is really summarizing all of the actual things that you can do that I found to be the most effective techniques to actually lead through influence. Number one, own the ideas. Now, a product manager's job is not, and I see this all over the place, is not actually to build the product right. It shouldn't be about delivering the product in the right way. It is, in fact, building the right product. And building the right product is where product managers really drive the most value in their organization. I find time and time again, however, they end up kind of downstream, really focused on managing the delivery and not putting nearly enough thought up front in terms of really making sure that the ideas that are being prioritized are robustly thought through. So you don't need to be the smartest person in the room. Being able to recognize good ideas from anywhere, being able to gather ideas, being able to encourage a culture of ideation and embracing those for wherever they come from is an important part of the role, in that who cares where the ideas come from so long as you can actually take them and own them and take them over the line, hence the football analogy in the photograph. I find, and I'll introduce a simple framework in just in a minute, that once you actually have understood what ideas are on the table, and by the way, I've noticed many product managers actually really hate ideas because they can often be very, very distracting, particularly if they're coming from like stakeholders who have very, very clear ideas about what solutions they're looking for. But if you do that too often, you're always sort of batting away the ideas to try to focus on something. How do you know you're missing? How do you know you're not missing something important? Instead, really relentlessly collect data and challenge assumptions. So this is where that challenging persona comes in that we mentioned in the opening there. Really making sure that you're making them as robust as possible and that you've understood and prioritized and shaken the tree to make sure that all those assumptions, particularly when senior people have an idea, they tend to fall in love with it and immediately gravitate to, say, a solution. They don't necessarily think of all the things that can go wrong. Your job is to sort of walk that back a bit and make sure, first of all, that the solution is that you're actually thinking about a problem instead of a solution. And secondly, that you're really challenging, is this the right thing that we should be prioritizing and working on? And once you've done the prioritization, one of the most overlooked roles that I find in product managers that I see in influential product managers is to really own the evangelism of those ideas. So this is where you drive focus and lose ownership and get people really motivated and excited about what you've learned. This is about sharing lots of data This is about telling great stories. This is about getting up on stage. And this is about celebrating the team's work and celebrating small successes, as well as celebrating the things that you're learning along the way, sometimes not so rosy. So that's a role that I find is so often overlooked. Here's a simple framework that's gone in much more detail in the book, but for you to think through. On one scale, imagine there is this, and you'll know this from design thinking. One end of the scale is this divergent thinking, and the other end of the scale is the convergent thinking. If you think about the divergent thinking, it's all about opening up possibilities, suspending long-held beliefs, imagining what the future might look like. But as a product manager, you can only stay in that zone for so long before you need to converge to drive focus and purpose, and to really make sure that everybody understands what has to get done. Then if you overlay that with another axis, on one end of the scale is this imagine, and then on the other end is the inspect. Now imagine is sort of, if you think about Myers-Briggs, it's the N in the Myers-Briggs. It's about actually thinking about strategy in the future and the possibilities, thinking about like what could be. Whereas inspect is a lot more of the S. It's whoever's unmuting, could you please mute, because we're getting lots of feedback from your microphone. Thanks. Could you whoever's on mute, could you mute?
Kate, I believe we can force mute if they're not cutting out, unless I just cut them out.
Thanks.
I think we've got them.
Well done, honey. Another little thing in Zoom that I would love to fix. And then on the other end of the scale is this sort of inspect, where you're looking at what is today, the reality, what is the customer, what are their needs, what's the data you have, what's the behavioral analysis, and what are the assumptions, and what is the reality of our business. So if you overlay those two together, you end up with four very distinct mindsets that really great product managers transcend sort of seamlessly, often in the same day, walking from a brainstorming meeting in that explorer mindset into being able to have a meeting with, say, or do a customer interview to be that analyst, into a tough stakeholder session where they are really laying out the options and what's the assumptions and why might we be wrong, and what are the investment options that we might need to make, including potentially killing the very thing that I've just been working on, all the way through to evangelism, which is going back to the team and making sure that everybody's really aligned, really excited about what they're working on. And so you can imagine in a product manager's mind, you've got this sort of crazy extremes that you need to be able to kind of move through on an almost daily basis. And unlike a design thinking paradigm, which is sort of inherently linear with some, I totally get this, there's feedback loops and moving back around. But in the design, in the mindset, framework, it's far more transient, of moving consistently between those things if you want to be successful. Number 2, build relationships before you need them. Now, clearly, building a strong rapport with your direct manager is really important, and we often think about our senior stakeholders and some of these others, but rarely do we say to ourselves, how do have I fully built these relationships in a way that when I need to rely on those relationships, the trust is there and I'll be able to really rely on that. And so this is really flipping it on its head a little bit, which is build the trust, build that rapport, be very deliberate in your relationship building before you need to be able to rely on having to sort of turn to a stakeholder or sometimes peers or even junior people in the organization. You want to have built that trust. And so this is really quite something for particularly product managers who are new to an organization to really be thinking through and being very deliberate about, and it takes a lot of time. However, the good news is there's a fairly simple trust equation at work. Trust is actually the frequency of quality interaction. Now you'll notice I didn't say depth or time or playing soccer, although that's a pretty good thing. It's just these lots of nice, light touch, frequent interactions that, so long as they're meaningful And they don't always have to be about the company or getting down to business, but it's about any kind of quality interaction, even if it's very short. The more that happens, the more frequent that happens, the higher trust is, which makes things a lot easier. You don't need a 2-hour-long lunch or a one-on-one every single week. You just need to be thinking, how do I reach out? How do I build trust with my stakeholders? Plus your follow through. And that too can be very, very simple. If you've committed, even like, I'm going to send an email at the end of this meeting with our talking points, and then you don't do it in a timely way, that loses trust very, very quickly. So always being responsible for following through on things that you said you would do will make a huge difference, no matter how small. And then back to that manipulation kind of comment before, people can sniff out self-interest pretty quickly. So being very clear about what's in it for them and what it means for the customer or what it means for the business, and leading with those things first in this order: what it means for the customer, what it means for the business, what it means for the team, what it means for them, what it means for you. And being able to be clear on that, and you'll build trust a lot quicker. Define your stakeholder group very broadly. I found that IT departments, HR, the front desk are all incredibly good people to have on side when you need sort of some software bought at the last minute, or travel arrangements to be made, or sandwiches or donuts to be delivered to your hardworking team. So just really thinking very broadly, and yes, share your goals and involve them and have them thinking about their role, no matter how small, in helping you achieve that. Will really empower them. Meet with them one-on-one initially, and listen more, talk less. I do believe asking lots of questions, including their thought of the product and what's important priorities. The quicker you go into what you want out of them, the quicker they detect that self-interest and kind of turns them off. And being very deliberate in your stakeholder management strategy. For example, don't put difficult people off. Embrace the difficult ones. Go and understand why they may be negative about your product or the goals, or where are the misalignments in their incentive system versus yours. Try to understand, maybe there's some history there. Secondly, make sure you understand their hot buttons. Make sure you understand their preferred communication styles. Do they like long status? Do they like just data points? Do they just want to know that everything's okay? Or do they only want to get involved when there's maybe brainstorming to be done? Or maybe they just want an update to know that everything is going well. Number 3, related to your stakeholder, is this policy has done me well throughout my entire career. And I can tell you that it's very time intensive, but far more effective and so much higher ROI on my time than having a whole bunch of things go wrong, because I haven't spent time to actually ensure that I have an understanding of what individuals in the group are really thinking, and to ensure that I previewed particularly any controversial data or information with them beforehand. And they're not surprised in the middle of a meeting with something being revealed that they haven't had a chance to actually process and digest. And in many ways, it's such a missed opportunity. If you don't do that step and you surprise people, you're actually missing out. Not only are they going to react defensively or negatively or with surprise, and that'll be a negative in your column, but you're missing this opportunity to win them over and actually have them speak in positive terms about these new insights, even if those insights are not what they had wanted to hear beforehand. I've had countless, I won't go into too many stories. There's one famous case I remember very well, very difficult stakeholder, being able to kind of get them accepting the data that I had. And they actually spoke in very positive terms about the new direction when it came time to the meeting. So this is very simple. You're aiming to kind of pre-wire this group consensus. Dangerous word. Don't consensus is next to impossible in any organization. That's not really what you're shooting for. You're trying to ensure that you're previewing these key points individually with the people who are going to be in that group and pre-wiring it. This gives them time to digest, potentially get on side. And even if they don't, it forewarns you of issues that might derail you, gives you more heads up on how to prepare. And you can avoid the fact that it's going to be uncomfortable anyway. So let's share that inevitable information that is going to potentially disappoint, but better to do that ahead of time. Now, this might seem obvious. I am astounded how often I see this done poorly. All right. Number 4, focus on the problem, not the solution. Now, we've heard this, and we're in the design thinking group. We live this every day, and it's just so important to keep on reminding people that there is a difference between the problem space and being in the problem space and being in the solution space. And yet we are consistently rushing to defining solutions before we really understand the problem well enough. And this is particularly happens a lot with junior product managers, but I see it happen quite often when a product manager is, no matter how senior they are, engaging with senior people in particular. There's a bit of authority bias there. Senior people they might default to articulating things in terms of solutions, in terms of things that they want, and being able to kind of work with them to work back to the problem can be a lot of work, particularly with people who are very, very clear of themselves and perhaps actually outrank you. So no matter what you do, I'm not going to go into too much detail because you're all experts. Defining and validating from your customer's viewpoint, the moment you actually talk about that and stepping back and say that's what we need to define in terms of those terms rather than the business terms, you can often have a breakthrough there. I really like just recasting everything as a hypothesis. And then there's this really interesting psychological shift that happens when you talk about something in terms of a hypothesis, in that you take away that sort of personal attachment to an idea or to a specific course of action. And if it doesn't work out, you always said it was a hypothesis. And so long as you learn something, you don't have to make it work. And so it really does change that kind of psychological safety in an organization and change the kind of the dynamics of how you interact with ideas when you get in the habit of restating everything as a hypothesis. And then you naturally are more led to what's the smallest increment that we need to actually test possible solutions and validate this. And then clearly focus on the problem drives context, because you're able to share data and get everybody involved around the problem you're trying to solve, and then step back and let the team really come together and think of the solution. The more that we can do that and talk in terms of the problem, and then let the engineering team and the design team engage around what problem to actually solve with all the same context, your solution is going to be so much better. There is, in reality, there's a lot of impediments to that. Many cultures, for example, have an engineering team, I've run into this a lot, that wants to be told exactly what to work on. Or upstream, you have a very strong sort of stakeholder group, particularly say a sales organization, that is very clear about what has to be in the product for them to sell it. So there's a lot of impediments to being able to work in this. You just got to really break those down over time and start small if you can. Number 5, prioritization is something that is very hard for any product manager. And what I've discovered with all of the different tools, when I started to really understand more about prioritization, I focused a lot on the tools that people were using: scorecards, RICE methodologies, theme-based roadmaps, business cases, and really tried to understand like which tools were the best. And the thing that I really realized is that all of the tools, more or less, will work if they're the right tool for your culture, right tool for your team. And that actually the process and the tools is the easy bit, but it's the people that are consistently the hard bit. As soon as we acknowledge that, it doesn't really matter what tool we use, so long as it's situationally appropriate. But the key is to actually take people through the prioritization process and being very clear about how do things get prioritized? What are the criteria? How are decisions made around priorities? And making that very transparent, and then taking people through that in a disciplined way will change the game markedly. Even when people have very, very strong ideas about what they believe the priority should be, when you own the collaboration around the criteria and the goals and being clear on what you're trying to achieve, and then in a very objective way apply the tool set, whatever you're using, to prioritize things, you have a much greater chance of coming out with a better outcome. That is, the right priorities and some level of consensus. If not consensus, you'll get a pretty good alignment. Now, saying no is unpleasant, so you have to do this. Yes can be worse. It's a zero-sum game. Even agreeing to do some analysis, or I hear this all the time, right? Oh, can we just gather more data, or can we just figure out a little bit more before we say no to that? That is still saying, yes, I'm going to put resources over here and not there. And so saying no is unpleasant. In my book, I do go through some techniques for saying no nicely. I did see that was something that came up in our chat at the beginning. Now, trick, before you look at any features, before you look at any initiatives, align on the user and business goals, and specifically the criteria by which you're going to do prioritization first. Abstract that out. Then, using the best available data, which you'll never have enough data, prioritize your features once you've got agreement on how you're going to prioritize it. If you don't get agreement on the criteria and the methodology, you're never going to arrive at a set of priorities. So that's why focusing on the framework is where a lot of value can be unlocked, because you're more likely to get alignment there. And by the way, it will be an embodiment of what the company and a company actually values and what the company's strategy is. And if it isn't, then you need to go find that out. The other thing is to think about this as not always a one shot. Once you actually prioritize something, you don't obviously want to do that every day, throw it all up in the air. The goals and the criteria should be relatively unchanging, maybe quarterly, maybe yearly. But then as you gather more data, don't be afraid to reprioritize. And particularly if you have a roadmap, always talk about it in terms of planning. And this is a plan of action that is subject to change because of the new data that's going to come up. You'll like this. It shocks me still at the sheer number of product managers who don't regularly speak, interview, or observe their customers. Do not outsource the most important part of your role. Just because you've got a user experience group or a customer insights group or a customer success team or a sales team that are talking to customers regularly does not mean that you can ingest all that data and information secondhand. You just lose way, way too much. For a start, you lose that opportunity to really build that empathy and to sort of understand the customer in their environment firsthand. Secondly, you're not making those little like delightful observations of like, oh, I came to talk to you about this, but now I'm observing maybe you have some other problem that I might be able to solve. Your teams may not be asking those problems. For example, if you've got a user experience group focused on user testing, they're really trying to test any artifact for usability, but they may not be the kinds of questions that are actually more insightful to you. You're looking for maybe new opportunities, new areas of value. Now, it's time and time again, we make this way too hard. We always make this all about like some big upfront effort where there's a ton of research goes on for a long, long time. I really push back on that. There's a place for more complex, in-depth consumer research, absolutely valuable. But to rely on that by itself It just doesn't happen often enough, doesn't happen with, it's very time consuming. I recommend getting this very frequent, informal and lightweight engagement to give you a sense for a consumer organization. Say you're building a mobile app. There is no reason why you can't have 5 users coming to your office, or you going to the local Starbucks or coffee shop every week. There's no reason why you can't do that. Okay, you might invite 5, 4 might turn up and 3 might be useful. That's fine. All those little kind of half hour like time talking to the customers, you're going to improve your understanding and your learning and your insights just by a little bit every single time. And it's quite fascinating to me how even just 5 data points can unlock, you can discover so many issues very, very quickly, because anything that comes out, even with 5 users, I think there's actually some data that I saw where just by talking to 5 users, you have a 80% or more chance of finding something that affects more than 20% of your audience in just by talking to 5 users. So keep it lightweight. You'll learn a lot very quickly. And think what happens over a year if you've talked to 50, a couple of weeks off for good behavior, 50 times 5, okay, maybe 50 or 25 times 5, tons and tons of users you've talked to, and it really didn't gobble up a lot of time because you're not going in with all of this planning and artifacts. You're building a simple script. You're coming up with 1 or 2 hypotheses you're wanting to test, and you leave it at that. And then, of course, partnering with your research, insight, user experience teams is essential. So you don't go alone. Just don't solely rely on them. Number 7. How many times have I heard product managers say that my team, or I'm driving engineering, or I'm driving delivery? Partner with, don't drive engineering. I'm sorry, engineering doesn't work for you. How do you overcome that? Well, if you're working through influence, and we touched on this earlier, this is all about focusing on why and encouraging that ownership of the what and the how. The more prescriptive you are, in fact, of the what and the how, you're more that you're de-empowering them, disempowering them, and also training your team to not ask questions and not actually find better solutions. So focusing on the why is incredibly powerful, and I found very, very motivational. Most developers are in it because they want to be useful. They want their talents to be making an impact, and they're largely going to push back until they understand that they're going to have that impact, because they've been way many times misled into doing something that turns out not to have impact or never saw the light of day. So really focusing on the why will help them understand and help them own the solution, and appreciate potentially downstream changes as well. Even if something doesn't eventually ship, at least they understood what you were trying to attempt. And that includes involving engineering early during discovery. I get this pushback a lot from my clients. There's a sort of idea that an hour spent with an engineering without having their fingers on the keyboard is wasted time. But there's this anecdotes that I just keep on coming back to, of like the time that I took a very difficult engineer on to meet a customer, and the customer was using the product, and the engineer was working on this particular product and saw the customer struggling using the product, and the engineer came back, and by within 2 days those problems were no longer in the product, because they had seen firsthand and they actually felt the pain, and actually felt as a point of pride, if they can't use my product, I've got to fix that. So getting engineering to engage here is super important. It's not always easy because of that value perception. So start small, start with 1 or 2 things, start with half an hour, start with watching a video, or just getting or sharing anecdotes and insights and involving in brainstorming, just trying to get a little bit more involvement on the discovery side. I think it's worth its weight in gold. And before you get involved in any project or large initiative, make sure you've done 100% transfer of all the knowledge and the process you got to get there. If you distill that down too much, particularly if it's just a set of requirements, all of that wonderful context gets lost. So go back, go over old ground, and spend time to allow people to catch up. Secondly, always bookend that with a retrospective. So constantly look at how do we improve the process and ways of working together, and make that very open and very rational and very objective, and then pick 1 or 2 things to improve each retrospective. I'm not talking about the end of sprint retrospectives. I'm talking about more like ways of working over maybe a project or 2, but even like 2 to 3 next steps and implementing them, really committing to them, you'll see that over a course of a year or 2, dramatic improvement in your partnership. Now, what drives engineers nuts the most is when you're not being decisive. In fact, decisive turns out to be one of the 6 most important softer or adaptive skills of great product managers. The others being, we're going to miss 1 or 2, leadership, communication, collaboration, teamwork, decisiveness, and evangelism is actually up there as well. I've forgotten one, so I'll have to look it up. But decisiveness is so critical, and I just find that influential product managers are just ready to make tough calls early, throughout execution. They're all about keeping the team moving forward on track, and they understand one thing that's very important, and that is so many decisions are actually not irreversible. They're reversible. And that the worst case is sometimes you might be off track for a couple of sprints, and then you learn something, and then you can introduce that as new context and get back on track. And being wrong occasionally is so much better. And they're not going to be happy about that, but being wrong occasionally is so much better than being perceived as being indecisive. Examples of where I see indecisiveness. Moscow method, okay, I don't really like Moscow method as a way of prioritization. No nice to haves, no should haves. Do the hard work to scope super tightly up front, so it's only the must haves. Making sure that you're engaging around estimation and date setting very, very sensitively. Talking in terms of dates too early will make a big, will really trigger, because now you're going to be pushed into making trade-offs that you're not ready to make yet, particularly on scope. So be very, very thoughtful about how you engage around dates, and try to engage instead around problems and discovery, and then scope before you get too deep in dates. And this often requires educating stakeholders as well. Respecting the quality. When your team pushes back on something, they might say something like, do you want this done quick, or do you want this done right? Or there might just be this discomfort with doing certain shortcuts. Look out for that. Do not push them too hard into this, because they will do things the short way, but then no one ever wants to hear this. 6 months in, 18 months in, stop. We have to rewrite everything before we can build anything more. And that's going to take 1 whole quarter to rewrite the whole platform. You don't want to hear that. So you want to really be investing in tech debt. A good rule of thumb is 30% of your investments, or ensure that there's a tech debt backlog, and you're letting your team pull from that on a regular basis, even if you don't fully understand it yourself, although try to. We're in the home straight, folks. Owning outcomes, not projects, is basically saying owning the outcomes, not deliverables. So a product release or getting something into the hands of the customer, that's just the start of the marathon. And I see far too many product managers at that point take their foot off the gas, and they don't drive go-to-market, they don't drive adoption, they don't ensure that there's metrics that are being monitored, and they don't look at those metrics and determine, am I hitting the outcomes that I promised at the beginning? They sometimes don't even have success criteria that they should have set at the beginning. So how do you even know whether something's going to be successful or not? They don't look then at the optimization opportunities, and they don't flag to their stakeholder group that things aren't done. Just because we release version 1.0 doesn't mean that we don't immediately need to get on 1.1 And by the way, if the product that we just released was the most important thing to do and it's not actually hitting the goals, it's probably important to get that right before you move on to the next thing. So you really need to make sure that you're engaging your stakeholder group during this very, very high, highly visible, high stress time when you're bringing something into the market, and really making sure that everyone and all the different people involved in the go-to-market success are involved and understand what their role is to play. You have to be very disciplined of managing post-launch issues. You do not want to miss something. I hate it when I'm told by my boss that he's seen a metric going down that I didn't see first, and I expect that from my team too. I want you to be the first to know, not me to be the first to know. And really owning that iteration and optimization. And that brings me to my last tip, and that is really making sure that you've got metrics that measure what really, really matter. We've seen those books and nice thing on vanity metrics, and yet every dashboard I look at, just about on the product side, are largely full of distractions. They're irrelevant to your actual product, and sometimes these vanity metrics can just severe fundamental issues. For example, they tend to look like this. They'll be numbers instead of percentages, so they're not comparable. They will not be meaningful to the product goals. In other words, they might be getting people to, say, registration, but not actually measuring onboarding, later adoption, and retention. They might be easily biased by external effects. So, for example, did you do something in the product to make that happen? Or was it some marketing campaign? Or did we acquire a whole bunch of users that are just different than the ones that you're used to? They tend to be lots of averages, missing all those interesting patterns and maybe segmenting and cohorting data. And they tend to be not all that well understood in your organization. So that's vanity metrics. Value metrics are the opposite of everything. And that is really getting to the pinpointing those metrics that indicate that customers are getting value out of your product. They tend to be leading indicators. They may correlate, ideally cause longer term achieving of the goals that you set out to do. They should be fairly easily and quickly read. So these indicators tend to be showing that users are adopting your product, using your product in droves, have positive feelings about your product, are advocating your product, and coming back and using it voluntarily. In terms of financial metrics, I believe that customer lifetime value is far superior than trying to track revenue for a product. So at least elevate the customer lifetime value calculation up. The reason is very simple. It is far more aligned with you over time generating value for your customer and being able to extract your fair share of that value than revenue, which might trick them into signing up for something and sort of misses the whole retention and longer term relationship that you have with that customer. And it also ignores customer acquisition costs. Customer lifetime value captures all of that. And yes, another thing, do not outsource. Yes, make friends with your analytics partners to be able to get you the dashboard and the data you need, that it is your responsibility to define upfront before your project's done what your success criteria are going to be, and then gather, analyze, and report on that data and make sure everybody understands it, even if it sometimes isn't that pretty. And that is it. They're the 10 tips to leading through influence. And I would be delighted to take any questions.
Ken, thank you. We do have some questions and lots of comments in the chat. But to kick things off, I've got a question to start with, and then we'll throw to people in the chat who have questions. So my question was this, because you began your talk comparing leading through influence versus leading through authority. Mm-hmm. And over the last year, I think we've seen both at play in terms of observing how organisations react in a crisis. Totally. And we've seen traditional product companies have to completely pivot. Traditional manufacturing has pivoted towards delivering personal protective equipment. We've seen other businesses thrive through pivoting. Zoom is, a classic example of how this has favoured digital-first companies. But in terms of leadership style, what have you observed? Have you seen that the same rule applies in terms of influence?
Absolutely. I am working with two companies that were on the verge of self-destruction during this whole crisis, and they pivoted very substantively. Now, authority is not invalid, and there's nothing wrong with pulling rank or using your authority when it's needed to get everyone in line. And it's just not a great tool to use all the time. And so when you have the time, when you can, ensuring that everybody understands the context, even in a crisis, what's the context? Share the context. What's changing? I'm not suggesting for a moment that influence should lead to consensus, time, indecisiveness. It can be quick. It's just about taking a step back and saying, everyone kind of needs the same information I'm processing, to the extent that I can do that. Now, and sometimes you can't, and you just need to say, I'm just going to make the decision, or I'm going to, it's just too sensitive, I can't share this information. That's all perfectly normal in business. Now, what I've actually seen is that in the two cases that I had in the writer's seat watching this happen, was the company actually came back to influence heavier than they had been working on before. And I put that down to the fact that they needed to get everybody, first of all, crisis was very focusing. All the data pointed to the problems that they were having. And they needed everyone in the organization to understand. They understood that motivation was going to be very important coming out of this. Particularly one had a significant riff. And so they actually almost overshared all of the context about what they were doing and why. So almost like came back to influence and heavy. And I've never seen, it was probably one of the best, hardest things, but most well handled that I'd seen in a long time. And interestingly, now that they're kind of out of crisis, a couple of them keep on defaulting back to authority again. I'm like, well, let's go back to, that was fun. Let's do that. So I do think that it's just a tool, and I'm not suggesting that you don't wield authority when you need to, particularly in a crisis, and if you need to jolt people into action. I don't know if that answers your question, but
yeah, no, it does. It does. And yeah, I'm interested to hear from people on the call around, what they've observed in their organisations in terms of response to the crisis. But Ben also had a question in the chat just about different
holocracies and teal organization. What is that? I've been introduced to new terms.
Holocracy and teal-coloured organisations. Are they familiar terms or no? No.
I'm in a new term here.
So different organisational models which might be applied organisation-wide or within specific teams, but taking less of a hierarchical approach and more of a domain expertise and collaboration in a much flatter organisational dynamic, which often means more collaboration, more leading through influence, as you're talking about, as opposed to command and control structures, which under the model is more like a red structure of, I'm your boss, so you're doing this thing.
Yeah. Well, I go back to the pros and cons of both. I don't think one or the other is necessarily better, and I would actually argue that either extreme is probably not going to be productive. That might be a little confronting for me to say that, but the issue that I see with holacracies that are completely open is it will work if you have the right culture in place. And that culture requires everybody to be on the same page, aligned, a meritocracy, trust is high, and everyone is moving towards the same goal. And that is a lot of work to get right. On the other extreme, top-down command and control structure is not fun to work in that purely either, but boy, they can get the job done. And so you got to be like, what's the balance here? And I do think that what's the case that was given to me recently? Spotify have this thing out there where they've got the squads and the guilds and all that kind of really great stuff. Turns out they never really got that to work, and they went back to a little bit more of a traditional organization where they had to standardize on, no, this is the process we're going to use, because they had like 15 different agile processes. They had to like go, no, we're actually going to put a more traditional coach and management structure in there, because there are in any organization going to be 10% of the people that just need to be moved out of the organization and be held accountable, and someone needs to be doing that. So there was a whole bunch of stuff there that I think that those are great organizations, but there's something about overlaying them that's really interesting to me, and seeing if you can get the culture if you get the culture right, then you actually temper down command and control, because it's not as necessary, and you can still leave the hierarchy in place. It just doesn't operates a little bit more of a servant leadership model, and then things I think work really well. But it's just so hard to operate at any end of the spectrum for a sustainable period.
Yeah, I think one of the upsides of everyone working remotely is that it has, for a lot of organisations, forced that level of transparency and trust within their teams, which has potentially been one of the upsides, because we've had to have greater trust in our colleagues, and
Really?
yeah, and that leap of faith when we don't have the luxury of being in a room together.
Yeah. I'll give you a case in point about how some of this customer behavior, user behavior is just transformed, in my opinion. So one of my friends works for a bank in San Francisco, and he had to basically shut down the office and get everyone to work from home. He's in he was doing all the IT stuff and set everyone up in a secure environment in the home. And the CEO resisted, said, no, I want everyone in the office. I know COVID's out, but we've got to like have everyone in the office. And he had to get over that trust barrier of like, no, we can actually make sure everyone's accountable and working still. CEO just didn't believe it was possible, and which is horrible when you think about like his own team. He's not trusting even at that level. Everyone went home because they had to work from home. Companies actually being never more productive. Now the CEO is talking about, do we really need that office? It's a real big cost center. Can we get rid of it? So what a transformation. So that's just in that leadership. For me personally, I'm working deeply with clients, and some of these are really in their teams and changing their teams up and evaluating and helping like change things. And a number of them, in fact, most of them now, the ones who I'm currently work with, I've never met in person. I don't think think about like what, as much as a silver lining exists, what this means for potentially, driving fundamentally different ways that we work together. And by the way, I'm in Melbourne, can talk in Sydney. I talked in South Africa. Access is up. So we now, accessibility to information and being able to really spread that around is up. And I would say our engagement levels are pretty high, because we can work a little bit more on our own time.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about on the topic of influence, it really does open up the influence that you can have, because you're not constrained by the four walls anymore.
That's right. Well, I'm hearing reports from formerly remote teams that were remote teams. I think someone even mentioned this early on. Remote teams, and then they were working with in-person teams, and there was always an information gap between the people on the ground sharing a lot more information and that not being available for remote teams. And this has been a great equalizer, and all the information is flowing a lot more freely now. And to lose that would be a shame.
Yeah. Diane Gatto had a question. Diane, would you like to pose your question, or would you prefer I just read it?
Go ahead, Diane. Sick of hearing myself.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, okay. Thank you. Yeah, so in terms of the hypothesis, what someone had advised to me probably a couple of months ago is when you're creating the hypothesis, to avoid the confirmation bias, to actually structure the hypothesis in a way of disproving what you think is going to work.
Yeah. Can
you talk more about that?
Yeah, that's called the null hypothesis, and yeah, I do talk about that a little bit. It's an advanced step on top of getting people to even talk about it in terms of hypotheses in the first place. So I'd say get them to do the hypotheses in the first place, and then work against confirmation bias. It is a big problem. Confirmation bias is a massive problem. Simply doing the null hypothesis doesn't actually necessarily solve that, but I do like the notion of disproving, the null hypothesis as a way of working forward. And I don't see it hypothesis generally done well. So it's a nice maturing step.
Yeah, I sort of kind of like the approach, because I haven't worked as a product manager. I've worked as an organisational change manager, and what I find is sometimes when I'm working with senior executives, they're very attached to their idea, and they're not open to receiving feedback.
Right.
And if you take in the position of the devil's advocate, trying to disprove that it's not going to work, you're getting the confirmation from outside sources rather than someone's a pet project.
Yep, agreed. In fact, an executive gut is like the lowest possible confidence you can have that something's actually going to work. So yes, it's a good tool to work against it. If you do that and you can get your team to do that, that's great. I sometimes struggle with getting execs to buy into that, because it's kind of like, oh, you're just trying to you're just trying to sink this idea. Can be sometimes interpreted as actually not getting with the program kind of thing. But the fundamentals of working against confirmation bias and finding ways to do that is very sound and necessary.
Okay, thank you.
That technique.
Cool. And we've got another question here from Moef. Would you like to talk? I'm not sure have I got your name right?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm ready to pose my question. Yeah. Thanks for this opportunity. So my question was when you were talking about leadership and like the influence and manipulation type of leadership. How do you build the trust with the team? Like you're talking about maybe from the management perspectives to the subordinate and the employees. So if we're talking from the opposite side, from employees to the management, if there is no kind of influence or there is no shared goal to be the basis of building trust, how do we deal with these kind of scenarios?
Apart from finding another company to work for?
Exactly, yes.
Because I'd start there. Culture is so challenging and so hard to kind of change.
Mm-hmm.
And so it depends how embedded it is. Look, politics exists everywhere. People are going to manage, at some level through authority. You can't work against it. There are just some techniques in terms of the importance towards managing that and the way you engage and ask questions. So, for example, in people in authority that are very clear that this is kind of what I want, you don't want to, not confronting them head on is not a good idea. Being a little deferential to their authority, acknowledging that, and then asking really good questions and showing that you're really interested in their idea and sort of matching some of that. That's not manipulation, that's influence. That's opening up the conversation so you can have a productive, objective conversation about it. But yeah, and so you can't just be like, oh, I'm going to have the null hypothesis, go back to that and try to disprove you wrong. And you're not gonna be very effective. So I actually like that word when I think about things. Is this approach going to be effective? It might be right, but is it going to be effective? And so trying to moderate your behavior to engage in a way that is not openly manipulative, but still deferential and sort of understanding that you're trying to get them to a position where they're going to trust you enough so you can actually work into the analysis whether or not this is actually a good idea or not. And you don't need to win that debate the first time you fight that battle. But you ultimately need to be able to work it in. And so if there's just a complete lack of refusal to entertain any other possibilities, you're kind of stuck. But you can try your best and make what you can work. And there's always non-negotiables. It's just sometimes they make sense, and you have to get with the program. You can dissent, but you should commit. But yeah, if that's just their MO, it's really hard to overcome that. The only other thing I would recommend is don't operate that way yourself, and try to show a different way of operating, at least within your team environment. And I've had that before, and it was very painful because I was getting full force of all of this authority, a refusal to be thought of that they could ever be wrong, politics at work, which is by definition, they're not saying the same thing they're not saying the same thing to me that they're saying to other people.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing this disconnect. I know that they're manipulating, and I'm getting that. And I guess it was just my principle. I'm not going to operate that way with my team. And so that caused a lot of conflict, but I was able to get my team in a higher position of trust with me. And when something like that did come down from the top and we had no choice, I was able to be a little bit more frank with my team, saying, this is kind of a decision that comes from the top. Here's the rationale. Objectively, here's what we know and don't know, and here's the risks, and we've decided to go with it. And I most certainly didn't play into undermining them. So, in the effort to be a member of the team, you kind of like roll your eyes and say, oh, I don't know what management are doing. No, don't do that, because that's manipulative. And you are management. Sorry. So you can't, them and us is not great. So I know I didn't really answer your question because it's a really hard one to sort of, I'd have to actually diagnose the context you're in, but generally those principles at work they've been good for me, and when they haven't worked, I haven't stayed at that organization very long.
All right, thank you.
So Ken, there a couple people actually asked the same question. So Jody and Sylvia, they're hoping that you could bring up the slide about point 9 again. So your second last principle that you talk about. Would you mind sharing your screen again so we can see slide 9, and maybe either Jody or Sylvia, was there something in particular? Yeah, here we go.
What's the question?
So, Jody, are you there? She's probably on mute.
Sorry, I was on mute. I was talking really well to myself. Yeah, just knowing the problem and not the outcomes resonated, and I liked the points, but I was capturing the screens as we went, and I didn't grab that one.
You got it. By the way, I'm gonna make the PDF is available, so you've got
cool.
it.
Yeah, I really liked it. I wondered as you were going through, since I've got you,
Yeah.
like the maturity
And by the
level
book.
that you see in Australia for you know, this kind of level of product management, and I mean, to me it feels very akin to human-centered design as well, and they're all munched together really. Like what do you see the differences between the States and here?
That's a great question. There's a couple of things. These are just to be really clear, this is like very scant data as far as Australia goes.
Just the vibe.
Yeah, I'll talk about the vibe. So the first thing I've noticed is that, unsurprisingly, it's more WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. Kind of, you know, there's a little bit more like directness, and I think that's cultural, Australia cultural. But when it comes into product management, it feels more. To me, it feels more authentic and easier to talk about some of the challenges and things and disagreement and conflict is actually embraced, I think, at a higher level here. And I'm thinking part of that's cultural and part of it's just, you know, the Australian product management scene, how it's evolved. Where we fall down is I see still far too many product managers not live this principle, that their product managers see their role as effectively managing a backlog for engineering to build a bunch of things that they've decided are important, and then they get them to shipping and they move on to the next thing. And I'm oversimplifying it, but this notion of really metrics is a great example. Just the maturity by which I see organizations in the US now embracing the need to define your metrics and be super clear about what you're shooting for. But, you know, going beyond A/B testing into, you know, whole projects, to be really, really clear on that. We're not there yet. We're still a little bit on the delivery mindset still, and so that's where I'd love to see Australia grow.
That's metrics up front, is it, Ken? Sorry, like getting that up front.
Yeah, getting metrics up front as sort of, this is what you're being very clear about what you're trying to shift, and then being honest and coming back to it. And so first of all, making sure that you define that, making sure it actually gets built in the product so you can track it, going back and building a dashboard and making sure that's part of the release, and then monitoring it, and then coming up with like insights about what's really going on and being just really honest and reporting out on what we're doing. That's got a ways to go. So it's just about you know, follow through at some level, but it's also it can be uncomfortable. And by the way, this is a generalization because I can tell you plenty of companies in the US fail miserably on being data driven in these sorts of ways. And I'll also say that I've seen also it go too far. And a really good case in point is companies that have gone down the A/B testing route, where everything has to be an A/B test. And that's not necessarily, sometimes you've just got to have gut. Feels like the right thing to do. It's part of our vision. We're going to just build this because it's really great for customers, and we're not going to test into it. And that balance, you know, there's companies that are overdoing it in the US now.
An interesting, just to share an insight, Ken, that aligns with what you've just said. When I've done a lot of strategy work in the past, and you try and get feeders for what the strategy is for a company, and one of the things I always ask for is, what are the goals and objectives that you measure your own role success on? And you get given their goals and objectives, and normally number one on the list is, I'm going to deliver this project on time, on budget. And it's like, no, please, no.
Nope, that's actually a constraint, that it's not a metric of success.
And these are sometimes C-suite executives that have these metrics. And
yes, of course. I do go into the book about this. This is sort of this arbitrary date setting kind of stuff that execs tend to do. It's because it's very understandable. They've gone far enough away from actually pulling the dials that it's the only lever that's sometimes kind of left. And so that tends to be the lever they'll reach for, is get this done by this date, set an arbitrary date. There's this sort of furphy that it's also going to set some kind of sense of urgency, whereas meaningfully talking about the problem you're solving will set a lot more a sense of urgency. De-scoping something so it's truly the value that you need to create will get things done quicker. So there are things I just recommend doing before you get too much around the date setting, and then some techniques of just how to set a date with an exec, involving, like, you know, being very clear about your confidence, being very clear about these, you know, the planning dates, trying to negotiate for milestones instead of a deadline. It's often helpful because you can track those quicker, and then that also can include things like time to discover, and then you turn around at that milestone and say, oh, this is what we've learned. So the next milestone's like stuff like that. But look, it's a behavior that it doesn't, you know, I have no magic wand of like, oh, no, you'll never be asked for another deadline again. I'm not going to sit writing that blog post, never be asked for another deadline again, because you're going to be asked for a deadline. And it's about trying to, you know, give yourself enough time to learn enough so you can be more confident about what you do end up committing to.
A couple of questions. I might, which I have a similar question around teams moving too fast, and how do you stop them just going and delivering before they understand the architecture and the structure and the goals?
Teams that, so you're basically saying teams that jump in too quickly. So is there a little bit of a hero thing, or just there being, hi, future product manager? This is one of the great things, seeing all kids and pets.
Yes, it happens a lot during the day. Virtue of a 5-year-old who's not at school yet, so. But I get a lot of smiles on the other side of the camera, which is nice.
That's awesome.
Sorry, there was like, I think there's a sense in the context of dates, and people wanting to get to a date or wanting to get things done. There's all this urgency just to start moving forward and start building and start doing something. And whilst the product manager doesn't want to necessarily make sure things are built right, you want to build the right thing. Sometimes that sense of urgency can mean you build it the wrong way, which actually does build out that tech debt, and people don't realize it until it's too late.
Yep. Again, we're coming up with hypotheses, and talking about things as hypotheses can be very helpful here, because the conversation can then change about, okay, I'm still figuring a lot of this stuff out. In the meantime, what is the most valuable, usually one of 3 things that you can do to advance the project, if you will, while I'm still figuring a lot of things out. And they tend to be, is there some core technology platform component that is just going to be required no matter what? So what's the foundational work, and being very, you know, clear on what that is. But then there is like, what is the biggest risk in this? And can you build me something to actually front load that risk? And I can then use that, or biggest unknown, and can I use that and get that earlier, and use that almost like as a proof of concept or a way of feeding into my validation. And so getting an artifact early that is something that is going to actually be validatable or testable, is, you know, a testable unit is super valuable. So engaging them in the unknowns, and then saying, look, I don't want to waste your time like anyone else, but we know we're going to get started. So how do we productively get started? And it's usually one of those 2 things.
Yeah, thank you.
I think Lorraine's left, but she asked a great question.
That's all right. We all answer.
We might pose it, because we're recording the session, so she can catch up on the answer. But I'm just trying to find it. She's moved from a really large company to a small startup, and is finding it difficult to get the business to slow down. So they just want features deployed as soon as possible. So yeah, her question is, should I just relax and
Yes.
wait till the product's more stable? Like, yeah, it's
for a start, like, and this kind of feeds back to the last question as well, is that if you're in an environment where you've got people who are really trying to ship and move things fast, that's actually a much better environment to find yourself working within than the other way around. So lean into it and embrace it and let them build some stuff that might get thrown away. That's okay. Like, worst case is that you might be a few things off, few sprints off, but especially if you can get them to build something, as I was just saying, you can get them to build something that's a testable unit that allows you to either A/B test or to go out and validate in the market. That's super, super valuable. So lean into it and get them to build it. So in this particular feature factory example that you just talked, this is very, very common again. The best way to actually tackle that one is to start calling every feature a hypothesis, let everyone ship it the way that they've been used to working, but ensure that there is a feedback loop, that when we're going to ship this, we still have success criteria. Here's our hypothesis. Here's what we expect to happen. Here's how we're going to measure that. And you go back and measure it. And very quickly, you start seeing all these features I've been shipping, what's actually working, what's not. And that's a bit of a wake-up call. And I take that data back to the exec and say, we're 60% efficiency here. Is that how we want to be working? And that'll often, not always, but at a minimum, it will make us think a little bit differently about what we're shipping, as each feature is actually not a done deal. It's actually a beta or it's an A/B test. And we try to shrink it down a little bit more, ship part of it, and then come back to it if it's working. So you might still be in a little bit of a feature factory, which is not that pleasant, but you're now at least getting the data loop going. And so if people have the data in front of their hands, they can choose to ignore it and keep on making decisions about, like, let's ship all this other stuff. But at least you're being very transparent about, this is the result of this behavior.
great. That's great. And Diane had a provocative question. Diane, are you still on the call? Would you like to?
I sure am. This has been a great session. So I've dealt with a lot of psychopaths in my time as an organisational change manager, and your statement about being influential, not manipulative. Is there ever a good reason to be manipulative?
As defined by getting someone to do that is against their interests?
So the situation where I had to be manipulative, which is very rare, was that, again, it was a C-level executive who wanted to have a pet project imposed on the people, and the people were strongly resisting the change. And so I'm sort of drawing an analogy that if in the product or in the service arena, which is where I'm transitioning into, if there is ever a situation where it is against the best interest of the organisation or the people or even the customers, then do you actually need to move into a more stronger influential? And if the influence doesn't work, do you actually be outright manipulative?
Interesting. Never been asked this question. I just think it's a slippery slope. It's like, it's an integrity issue for me. But I'm looking back and I'm like, yeah, there are times where influence, where was the line? I think if you can maintain integrity and you're not lying, frankly, where you're telling as much of the truth as you can. And look, sometimes in business, there are things you can't share, right? But it just feels really, really hard to walk that line over a long period of time.
Because it does pose an ethical dilemma, and the way I rationalised it was it wasn't for my best interest; it was in the best interest of the organisation.
Yes, I understand.
But you're right, it is that blurry line, and it's like, well, do I step over that line? And then, what's the temptation that I could do that over and over again?
Yeah. And what is the consequence if that is then discovered?
Well, in this instance, it had a better outcome. I hadn't actually reflected on what could have been. I think if I had not done anything, it would have caused a train wreck in the organisation. They'd gone through so much change. People were, there was quite a few people writing resignation letters, and they were actually, doing massive transformation.
Yeah.
And because I was always talking to, the people, the other managers, the other lines of business, I had a more rounded picture. But this particular individual was very, very set on his ways, and I had to really work hard to try and shift his mindset.
Yeah, I don't actually think that's necessarily manipulative the way you're describing it. It gets back to what's going to be effective and what's not. So just because you know some piece of information doesn't mean you have to share it, and sometimes you often can't. I am always working in an environment where I will actually often have more information than the individuals that I'm coaching. By definition, that's a good thing, that I actually have a full picture of everything that's going on, and they're not, the reason why they're being coached is they're not listening or they're not aware of an issue. And if I just lay it all out to them, they're not going to listen. So there is absolutely, I think, a case to be said that you've got to be thoughtful in the order in which you approach issues, what information you share, what you don't, how you navigate that. But the line to me is, if that was all out in the open, would it be a lie? Or would it be literally one thing's being said to one person and something's being said to something else, and it's just obviously wrong or obviously manipulative? And that's where it becomes really just like thinking about even if it's for the best interest kind of thing, what that can mean for trust, how that can backfire if, for example, others are involved in the deception. There's a lot of stuff that can happen. But look, there are things that sometimes you can't share with people, and you just have to operate as if it's not the case. There's been times where I've actually had to work with people that I knew were probably not going to be around the organisation the following week, and I can't say anything.
And it's situations like that where you've been privy to confidential information, but you cannot share that information, and so therefore you've had to, for want of a better word, spin the message.
Yeah, it's okay. Everyone, I think, knows that there will be times where you can't share information. But then if you then use that information, like here's two ways it would be bad. One is, I know that person's not going to be around the organisation next week, so I'm not going to waste my time talking to that person anymore. And suddenly they're all shut out and they're like, what is going on? No one's talking to me all of a sudden.
Yeah, that wouldn't be nice.
Yeah, that's not very respectful. The second thing would be, they're around for one more week. Okay, hey, I'm going to promise you a really big pay rise if you get me that document that I really need written by next week.
Yeah, no.
Right? That would be clear, extremely manipulative. So it's just, again, it comes down to, I have to operate in the best interest of the company. But by the way, no one would expect otherwise. And in that particular case, that person's clearly got problems. Not much you can, you're not going to be effective if you lay all the cards on the table. So I don't think it was necessarily manipulative unless there was a real, a lie told that was not. There's even situations where if someone's really going to hurt themselves, I've actually been in a situation where I had a CEO lose it and get violent.
Mm.
I had to kind of manipulate the situation, and I think that was fine because there was just no situation outside of it. So there are definitely edge cases, but I'm talking in the how do I approach product
average,
management?
average.
On average.
I like looking at exceptions, Ken.
Yeah, exactly. Well, playing politics just catches up with you, and so being very careful with that is just really critical. And it's because in a product management role, you live and die by your effectiveness of being able to navigate an organization that doesn't work for you.
Mm. Okay, thank you very much for that.
You're welcome. Great question. I'm really going to have to reflect on this a little bit more and maybe come up with a couple of stories.
Yeah, I can share some of mine.
It's an interesting one for me, because I think when you're getting into those sticky situations where your values get tested, I always come back to what is your intention, like what is your true intent, and try and understand what is the right thing to do. Because sometimes you will have to lie to come up with the right outcome for that person or for that organisation, and I don't want to make that sound like it's a manipulative thing, but it's what is overriding intention and what is the intent there? Is it pure? You want to make sure your intent's not impure, if you know what I mean.
Yep. Exactly, Lucas. Yep. It's all about the intention.
I think that's, like, just to add on to that, like, that's one of those cases where I wish, like, ethics was taught in, like, from primary school, because if you know where you stand, like if you're in Kantism or you're, you know, wherever you are, like, you've got to work out, like, is it the intention or the outcome, or is it like duality or whatever is going on? But it makes that when you get to that point, which is sticky, that you can be like, no, I'm about Kantism and I'm about outcome, which is like brutal, right? But you've got to be able to follow like the logic all the way through and see where that goes, and then go, well, how does it actually apply to this situation like now? Because there's totally arguments where it is about intention, but then a lot of the times, like, we're measured with outcome. But I think if you know those arguments, it puts you in a stronger position when you're stuck there being like, oh God, what do I do? This person's crazy. And they have no idea what they're asking for. But if you know them, and then at least it helps you as well, like, justify why you're going to take the action that you're taking. And to be fair, like, everything is justifiable, like, it's a slippery slope. But
yeah, I think it's probably a good question to pose you, Ken, around how do you balance intention and outcome? And I think if there's probably an example of where I see that probably coming to the fore from a metrics perspective is looking at the value of the customer through their lifetime as opposed to revenue. It sort of shows more intent towards a customer. But then if you think about intention and outcome, whilst they can be aligned, you sometimes fail at meeting the outcome, but the intention was pure. So how do you, because that could still be a successful cultural aspect you want to measure and celebrate that successfully. So it's an interesting one. So it's a really good point you raised, Zoe. Curious about your thoughts.
Thoughts on the so just pinpoint for me what.
Sorry,
because I can talk all day.
Yeah, it's my extroverted nature is I'm just throwing stuff out there and but that play off between intention and outcome and measuring one versus the other. And when you mentioned, obviously, as a product manager, you're really focusing on measuring outcomes and making sure you get to those outcomes. And how does intent fit into that from a measurement perspective? I
don't see any conflict. So my intent is that I wish to create value for my customers, so I solve a meaningful problem and extract my fair share of the value of that. My intent as a product manager, it's what I'm paid for, right? And my intent, to the sub points of that is that I want to ideally do that nicely. I want to do that quickly. I want to do that efficiently. I want to do that in a way that brings the team along with me. And there are, you'll notice there's fish on my cover. There'll always be fish lagging and off on the side and not, swimming backwards. In fact, in the book, there's a hidden fish somewhere who's completely lost. It's all by design. That's what a real organization kind of looks like. But generally, my intent is that I have a nice school of fish following me, kind of thing. But the outcomes are like, did I measure value? If I got the right metrics, am I actually delivering value, and am I measuring that value? And if it turns out that my intent was to create value and I went down the wrong path and I learned that and I decided I have to measure a different outcome now, that's okay. I don't see any problem with that.
Yeah. I think it's more a cultural thing about people probably focusing so much on measuring outcomes, but not focusing on the intent of the team doing the right thing.
Got it. Well, yeah, particularly if those outcomes are in your interest. Like, how do I get an extra 40 million in revenue? I go and ship a whole bunch of things that I sell and make a big promise, and then it turns out to be completely useless, and I churn my customers a year from now. I'll still get my revenue target. Well done.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, stuff like that does happen. It's why being intentional about creating value is sort of. I've definitely had one CEO who, literally what he did was I was trying to generate there's a travel product. And I really wanted to advocate for a carbon offset option that you could purchase from the site. A lot of research had suggested that there's actually a corporate travel site that actually corporations would like that as an option to be able to give to their employees as a way of sort of being okay with business travel, I guess. And pitched and everything, and I felt really good about it. I had a lot of data. This is actually something that corporations, not just individuals, wanted as almost like an employee benefit. And he just looked at me and he goes, "Ken, the only green I care about," and then he pulled a $50 bill out of his pocket and threw it on the table. I'm like, well, that's the end of that, because it wasn't going to make any money. I was like, well, that's the end of that one. And I was very disheartened because it illustrates to me in a most stark way everything I kind of already knew about him, was that he wouldn't prioritize anything. Like it was all about like, am I going to get money out of this? And I saw him being manipulative. I saw him being manipulative with investors, with the media, and it just left a taste in my mouth that I just couldn't stay there. So it is, and look, made a lot of money. The company was fine. People liked the culture. Like, it was just this integrity, that the intent and how those outcomes were being measured was so misaligned with how we wanted to work. No, his last name wasn't Trump, but he's one of his biggest supporters in San Francisco. And I'm not going to say any more.
I think that says enough. We're almost at the end of our time, but Ken, Grace has recently listened to your book, your audio book. So we were curious to hear from Grace and what you got out of it, and whether there's anything in your own job that you've been able to apply, perhaps.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Ben, as well, for acknowledging my comments in the chat. And Ken, great talk and great book, of course. One, I want to share, like, to me, the most important thing that I got through the book and while I was listening to it was like some reinforcement about believing in myself, like in these concepts that I have about what is to be product manager and what are the things that I have to do. Like, listen to this gut about what I have to do with the product in an organization where there are a lot of egos, or that we are trying to build something new, that we're trying to discover what it is, and nobody knows what product management is. So it was really helpful for me to listen to your stories. I could definitely identify with lots of them, and as well feel like, okay, all right, so that situation that happened to me in the past, like I acted in some way and then realized that I could have acted in another one that could be better. That's what to me was like what I feel that why enjoyed the book. And in one phrase that is almost at the end is that you said that product manager is not the CEO of the product. It was like, okay, it's good. I love to hear this. And you mentioned that it's because like we don't have like this power of actually being the CEO. Like we don't own the P&L, and we don't have this much of like basically it's like we don't have this power to actually, it's like, own the product itself. However, we have like the responsibility, or like the I would say responsibility. You definitely use better words for the success of the product.
Yeah.
So that was like very good to me, because I get to feel frustration sometimes, that I want to do something for the product and I face a lot of troubles and issues, and then I want things done in a certain way, but because I don't have that much power in there, then I cannot do them. So it's about working on how I can establish these communication channels with the people that are actually going to help me make the product successful. And that's what I can do, and that is then my responsibility. And indeed, I cannot manage a lot of things that happen. So yeah, that phrase that I'm not the CEO of the product, that was great. And
good. Well, I'm glad that really resonated, because I hear that thrown around a lot, and it's just something I don't think is very helpful. It actually, if anything, it makes us feel, what am I doing wrong if I'm not the CEO of the product? Or it might trigger certain behavior where you start swanning around like you're the CEO. The reality is you're not, and there's a lot of constraints on you. If anything, this is a reinforcing of, it's okay. You work in real world constraints. You cannot fire the engineer that's not doing the job. You can't decide that the P&L and the pricing is going to be this unilaterally. You just don't have that power. But that also means using the influential techniques become even more important, because that is your primary way of getting change driven through the organization. So mastering that, and secondly, acting as if you are actually the owner, that you are the responsible party, ultimately the directly responsible individual for this product, means that you can broaden your role and go and work with anybody that you need to, through influence, to make it successful. So yes, you are responsible for going and talking to sales if they're not selling the product. You are responsible for making sure that customer service knows how to support it. You are responsible for making sure that stakeholders support the investment choices that you're making and making the recommendations about where to go next. So you might act like you're you've got that broad-based power, you just don't have the unilateral authority. And so that's kind of the point, is be okay with the ownership and the responsibility. And it's just another way of saying you don't have the authority, but that's actually okay, because that's how you're going to be most effective if you really focus on that influential part.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Great. Well, I think that's great.
Yes, we've gone over time, but Ken, thank you so much for spending time with us tonight and sharing that amazing talk and great insights. Just a reminder for those people who haven't read the book, again, you can find it here.
We're getting some pretty good deals at the moment, just because the book's in promotion. So this is a great time to buy it. It is a heftier book. That's because I wanted to get it to be very, very practical and hands-on, and that you could use this as a reference to kind of go back, okay, where's the partner with engineering? I'm having trouble with my engineering team. Where's some ideas for that? So it is intended to be something that really gives you a great starting point. So I would obviously be delighted if you picked up a copy. There is an ebook, paper book, and you've discovered the audio book, which I must say I didn't. You're not going to have to put up with my voice on that one. But it would be great if you could pick up a copy. and let me know what you think.
I might just say that I did miss that you didn't speak the book, like that you were not the narrator, because it's really awesome to listen to a book with the original author.
They wouldn't let me do it, and I think it's because my Australian accent would have been just like too much, too foreign. Right.
In another edition, maybe.
Yeah, maybe in another edition. Although I really wanted some big Hollywood actor, but the budget wouldn't run to that.
So no George Clooney on the audio book.
No, I was actually more Freeman. Like, that would have been nice.
You can always get Donald Trump. He'll be out of a job soon.
Who knows? I'm going to have to go look at the map. They're supposed to announce Georgia today, but gosh, it's going to be. So just to give you an idea of how close that race is, they're like the winner is likely to win by somewhere in the order of 0.1%. It's crazy.
Yes, it's extremely close, and it's
Anyway,
taught us not to believe in exit polls.
Definitely not. I posted on Facebook that there's one job that won't exist at the end of 2020, and that's going to be political pollster.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. It was a really fabulous discussion, and it is our last design thinking meetup this year, so we're just so happy to get Ken along for it. We don't yet have our agenda for next year, but you can expect to see us back in, what are we thinking, Ben? Will it be January or February?
We traditionally skip January, so every second Thursday of the month should be back into our usual rhythm, and then we'll have to have conversations around when we can do some degree, might have to be limited audience, but some degree of face-to-face sooner than later, we hope, but we'll see how that plays out.
Fantastic.
And the pubs are still open, so we can always just go to the pub and catch up.
That would be nice. I miss the post-event talks.
Yeah. If I go to the next one, Ken, can you make it to Sydney and you can sign my book?
Oh, no problem.
Thank you guys so much. Have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and hopefully 21 is better for everyone. But lovely to see you guys. Have a good night. Thank you for joining us.